Welcome, everybody. And holy mackerel, here we are. We're doing another Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. And I've got with me today two of my dearest friends, Jan Jeremias and also Ken Caputo. And I am Bill Carell. And as you know, we get together every single week and we have these really impromptu conversations where we more or less just invent empowerment. Our whole goal in these little chats is to bring both ourselves and then you, our listeners, a little bit, a moment respite from whatever noise is going on in your life that you might want to replace with something that's a little bit more empowering. Does that make sense? Okay, so for I don't know, 100 some odd recordings. We have had no preparation in advance. We have just more or less seat of the pants, made stuff up on the fly, and let's see where it could go. However, we had a recommendation from Jan during I think our last recorded episode that we kind of get into exploring music a little bit. Jan, do you want to say a little something about that?
Well, I think I was at two meetings recently, and one, um, we were talking about music and the impact music has on people and the ability of music to unite people from different backgrounds and different I mean, just everything, and how it really has the ability to kind of connect people. And then I was had the gift of listening to a wonderful woman who has a business about advocating through music. So advocating a cause or a message through music. So she's a musician and she helps people write a song basically around whatever it is, and then puts video in the background of facts and everything, and how she's been helping people to do this. And she did that for a cause. And so I think I was very struck about this idea of making change in the world and connecting people and communication via music lately.
I like it. So here's what I did so that we had at least one of us that was pointing true south. I did no preparation for this at all. And I'm going to be, my official role is going to be the reactor and the sage listener. And I'll be speaking 100% from experience and all the things that I've observed during my adult time period. But it's clear to me that that topic of what music is for people in terms of gathering folks, in terms of creating community, in terms of doing all of these other really important things in the world, there are a lot of people that know about that. And there's great study that goes into it as well, as I think we'll probably get into. Ken, what's your take on the whole music thing?
Makes sense, and I know nothing about it. Yeah, the about the only thing I have a little bit of familiarity is sound therapy, and that's something that my mentor, you know, did some things with, and also mantra and just creating vibration through sound and rhythm and those kind of things. But but yeah, I mean, you see it all around you, just the celebration and just the way that music can trigger certain memories and periods from your life and situations and you know, so absolutely get it. Very curious to learn more about it though.
Yeah.
Jan, if you would, could you kind of lift the hood for us on the music for a cause and
Sure.
how that seems to work and what the thinking is behind that?
Well, the woman, this wonderful woman, Rochelle, who created it, her sister passed away of colorectal cancer. And at her memorial, she wrote a song to her. And then she decided that she wanted to help people. Um, she wanted to create more education around getting colorectal screening, and and looking at that. And so she took a whole series of facts and she created video behind it. And then she then sent it out to a whole bunch of different organizations that then asked her, like, got it, and then came back to her and asked her to be an ambassador and all these different things. But based on that and watching, she has a TED talk, and I don't remember. I mean, I could look it up while we're online and give you the TED talk, but this whole idea of being able to advocate either, whether it be a cause or a message through music, and it just became really interesting to me. Um, I think people remember songs. I think the ability to listen to a song, you're listening to the music, you're listening like the vibration, as Ken was speaking, you're listening to the words. It creates a feeling. So you have some sort of physiological response to that song, which I think makes it have even a more profound effect on the way on your ability to kind of incorporate it and make change, because it's not only working on a cognitive level, it's working on a heart level.
It's also an amazing communication mechanism in which, again, there's this whole opportunity for the sender to have an intention that gets received differently by the receiver. I mean, over thousands of years, I think it's one of the main reasons, if you look back to the Renaissance and, when classical music started to get funded by wealthy aristocrats. Mostly that had to do with creating something that would create an esprit de corps and some sort of if you will, an exclusive club for those people who were patrons of the arts. And at the same time, they really wanted to have a very powerful way of communicating in another medium that could be generated in different parts of the country and different parts of Europe, if you will. So if you think about great classical composers such as Haydn and Chopin and Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, and it just goes on and on, this was a way that music could be codified in such a way to create the same visceral response in the listeners, no matter what orchestra was playing it and no matter who was performing the melody. It had this way of really making something um, available to the common person. And in those days, the common persons were mostly landowners, probably titled, and more or less, what we would call the elite superclass. The other thing that it's been done really well for is for different governments and ruling classes to take music. For example, the whole Norse mythology and the Wagner, all of those suites. At an early age, I fell in love with the Flight of the Valkyries, and some of the others, just the feeling that it can evoke. And I used to before what was it called? uh, wasn't Platoon, it was the other one, something Armageddon, but with Robert Duvall. And I love the smell of napalm in the morning where they had these big
Oh,
speakers hooked
Apocalypse
up in
Now.
the
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now, right? Thank you. So, mind is a terrible thing to lose, and I lose mine regularly. But the whole idea is what the ability to evoke an emotion. So that's all with an intention. Sometimes it just is a healing device, as you were talking about, a woman creating a song, when a loved one had passed. And there are many beautiful pop songs that were written exactly the same way. And we did mention Tears in Heaven, with Eric Clapton. uh, how do you complete an absolute failure to be, of a human being, in terms of being able to protect the life of a son, and I don't know, if you look more at that, uh, can you come up with other pop examples of where music is being used to either create what you would call inclusion or a gathering spot, or maybe division and an opportunity to clarify that not all groups are part of the same culture?
Mm.
Well, for example, um, are you guys familiar with where the three note tones originally initiated? Like the NBC, doom, doom, doom.
No.
All right, so I'll tell you a story, and it might be true. Um, Way back when telegraphs were the ways to get information, and a telegram was a way to get information from point A to point B, whether point B be a local place. People would send telegrams in the same city and then know where the person who was receiving it would be at a particular time, and they might be at a restaurant, for example, or they might be on a train, or they might be, something of that nature. And they would walk into a large group of people, and to get their attention, they would have a hammer and they would have three tones. Usually it was like, it actually was the NBC sound in a lot of cases in New York City. It was dun, dun, dun. And then they would announce the person's name. But everybody knew that when they heard that they should listen for a moment, that there was going to be information coming. And typically it was some kind of a message or a telegram, because we're talking before the adoption of telephones, and it might even have been a telephone message that came in, to the concierge or to the maitre d, and they got it that way. So that carried on, and it was quite remarkable to watch. I think in the early 1980s, when all the tech companies started adopting that too. Intel, doom, 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 doom. So now that immediately tells you that, along with the other visual and auditory messages, it sets you up in a particular thinking, and it's familiar. Okay, immediately calls you to some sort of an action, either listening or spending money or cursing or something. Where else?
Well, I'm thinking about now with
Yeah.
the constant kind of alarms and tones that are now have created, somewhat of an addiction, that ping that you've gotten, you know, that, from all the alarms or the alerts from all the different, programs that we're in, from, social media platforms, and all of a sudden, and emails, notifications, and phone messages, and that constant stimulation of an alarm versus, you think to yourself during what you were talking about was the era of the telegraph, how often did that happen? And I'm sure that they associated it with certain things at that time, depending on the era. I think of wartime and the fact that, what those messages might have been, you know. And now all of a sudden we have moved into an era where we're constantly given those alarms or alerts unless we happen to turn them off, and have enough self control to say, okay, well, I don't want to, I don't want to have any idea whether I got notified about anything, nothing is that important.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll tell you what, it is quite visceral, because even like ringtones, okay, there was a period of time where I gave ringtones to my wife, a different one for my daughter Becky, and a different one for my daughter Heidi. And I would be out at a networking meeting or something like that, and somebody else's phone would ring, and it would be Heidi's ringtone, and I'd go, "There's Heidi."
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that that's a whole another interesting thing about tone or sound or vibration is what it, and so we see that with the alerts of like what it does to the brain and what it does to you know our fight or flight mechanism, or the cortisol levels, or however you want to get into the physiology of the physiological signaling that happens when you get that alert.
The whole thing is quite remarkable. Most human beings have no idea how many different ways their senses can be manipulated to cause and initiate behavior by, in many cases, an unscrupulous set of human beings that are all out to do not necessarily good things for you. It's the whole
It can also,
Pavlov's dog thing.
yeah, yeah, it can be a
Yeah,
positive too, though.
absolutely.
It's interesting. I know for me, I utilize sound for doing deep work by putting well-known songs on loop, on repeat at a very low level, and it actually helps me, it improves my concentration. So, so it's a tool, like anything else. It's funny, like I don't have my phone, all that stuff is always on vibrate. Like I never have any, I zero tones, haven't for years. So, so I just visual because I don't want the distraction of that auditory in that way. So, so but it is, it can be a very intentional thing when we talk with, parents about helping their students, especially when there is all that home learning going on, creating a learning cockpit, where they can be in an environment that's conducive to learning for them. Sound was one of the considerations, and for some of them, they needed quiet. For others, they needed something going on in the background. You
Yep.
know, specific type of music. It's just, so I think just being aware of it, you can recognize how it can be beneficial to you. You know.
I think that's I love what you're saying, Ken, because I'm a science math geek, and when I was in school, I could do math, and but like people could have been blasting any type of music, and it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, I was
Mm,
in just
Yeah.
such a zone. Well, if you gave me something to read, or if it was like English lit or history, I needed absolute silence. Like it, you couldn't have heard a pin drop, and that was just the way my brain worked. That was what
mhm,
was. But then the ability of vibration or music to heal. When I was in Portland, Oregon, a number of years ago, I went to a woman who did vibrational healing. And what this was it was like a massage table. And the whole inside, it was a frame, but the whole inner part of the massage, so it was just a frame, and the whole inside part were harp strings. And you lie
mm,
on a pad on the harp strings, and she would play it from underneath the certain strings. And since we are however much percent fluid, vibration moves through fluid, and it was about decreasing inflammation or congestion, or like congested energy and not being released to heal. It was
mhm.
the coolest thing. I absolutely loved it. And I thought if any place it's going to take off, it's going to take place. It's going to take off in the Northwest, because that just seems to be where things move a little quicker than up here, like than over here on the slow coast, as I like to say it sometimes. But it was
Yeah.
so cool.
She saw a
I have
teacher do a really cool
never
thing.
heard
She would
of
use
that,
a
and that is
Tibet
fantastic.
a teacher would use a Tibetan prayer bowl, and it
Mhm.
was fascinating to watch. She'd have the students, she'd rev it up so it's making the tone, and the students would close their eyes and go completely still. And what she'd say is, "Open your eyes when you can't hear the tone anymore." So for all of them, they'd reach a different place. But what was fascinating was you'd have all these kids fidgeting and twitching, and all of a sudden you gave them this vibrational tone as an anchor, and every single one of them would go just still for a minute, and it was just really neat, as just another example of a way that you can play with sound. It's not necessarily music, but it's the same thing, it's tapping into that, you know, that sense in
Well,
that
the
way.
Right.
the interesting part of it is, with what you're saying, is how is it not music as well? The antithesis
Yeah.
of so what's the goal of music? And it, the prayer bowls, the different gongs, the all the different auditory methods of evoking, those mindful, uh, I don't know what you call it if it's not music. And the golden chord, that I always mention, we are one, and then there's another higher tone and up another third. We are all one. And you put those all together, and you do this over a half hour, and you have guitar music, and then you have the bowls, and it's just amazing. And then if you want to spur some activity, you get the bowl out and you drag your finger around the top of it in a room of trained, conditioned people. I'm particularly interested, and I'd like to go back to it, Jan, if you don't mind. The whole idea of having this bed on top of a harp,
String.
and those vibrations, um, can you kinda, like, take us through a minute or 2 of how the process worked? Did you do it eyes open, eyes closed?
I
Were you
mean,
working to get to a meditative state, or
um, I mean, it was, I mean, she did some centering, just breathing, in the beginning. Trying to remember whether I had shared with her. I think I shared with her certain things that were going on in my body at the time. And I was on my back, and there was a pad, but it wasn't a very thick pad on the harp strings. And you're lying down. It was obviously almost like massage type kind of element. I obviously no music, but just dim lighting and candles and things like that. And then she would play it from underneath. And I remember definitely helping. I was having lower back stuff, so it was definitely helped my lower back and made it feel better. And I just remember getting into a total zone of total complete relaxation, like I was really chilled. And I had never, I've done a lot of different kind of modalities through the years, from acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, rolfing, myofascial work. And so this was just another kind of, I thought, really wonderful kind of add on to all of those, because I think they're all great. And, at different points, I've used all of them. And it was just this wonderful experience. And on a physical level, I did understand it. I mean, we do are fluid, and vibration does travel through liquid. So I thought, well, if it's totally reconstructing that fluid, or the ability of that fluid to be more open, or those molecules to separate, the ability then to maybe penetrate tissue and detoxify and everything, it just seemed to make sense to me.
I love it. It's totally offbeat and cool.
Right, exactly, which is why I loved it.
Yeah,
you know, I was like, this can't harm me in any way, and all it can do is
yeah.
help. And so I'm definitely open. If it's anything like that, I'm there.
Well, I'm gonna play something just for a second here, just for grins, if I can get it to go. So imagine lying back in your recliner or on a flat surface, closing your eyes, allowing yourself to just get lost in this for a minute or two. So, as time goes on, there's the incorporation of an acoustic guitar, a sitar, and half a dozen other musical instruments. And this goes on for 39 minutes. Great headphones and just lying in a position and then feeling all the stress and anxiety and any thoughts of anything other than what a beautiful life this is and what a blessing it is to be alive, you know? So I have to pay homage because this is a very famous Luann Oakes, who is a PhD, and this comes directly from Your Magical Divine Experiment, which I think was probably recorded by her. And it's a very, very nice CD series with all sorts of conversation, but then there are two distinct meditative musical segments. One's 39 minutes long and the other one's like 45 minutes long. I've been listening to these for at least 15 years. I couldn't find CD in your Apple Music library. You can ask Speaking of music, there's my buddy at Siri. So, in terms of a place to go, a place to be, and maybe, a place to invent, um, so much can be accessed in a moment, with just a little bit of music. Do you folks do anything in terms of listening to something? Ken, you said you put some music on at a low level and it's just kind of there in the background. Is there anything in particular you listen to?
No, no, I'm pretty pretty diverse in listening, so just it could be anything from classical piano to rock to country. I don't really care. So if I find it appealing and interesting, then I'll add it to a playlist. And I have usually if I'm doing deep work, it's more like lower key, kind
Yeah.
of mellower stuff. Um, and sometimes usually I listen to audiobooks when I'm training, like running and cycling and stuff. But sometimes I'll put on music, as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I've adopted the practice of running in my house. I have a pretty large first floor here, where actually I can run a mile in between 18 and 20 minutes. But I always turn the music up. I go to YouTube, and it's something different each day. One day it's Van Halen 1984 with Jump and Panama and Hot for Teacher, and then the next day it's Shostakovich, and then the next day it's Aaron Copland Appalachian Spring, and then the next day it's Beethoven's Ninth, just all over the lot. But and then one Sympathy for the Devil and that sort of thing. We get the Stones in there when we can, but that runs the entire time that I'm running, and it's been a very interesting experience. Um, and I've always had music on in the background while I'm working, especially since I've started working from home almost 15, 20 years ago. Blade Runner soundtrack, um, Fifth Dimension, or excuse me, Fifth Element soundtrack, um, The Natural, Randy Newman. I love it. And I love all of his nods to Copeland, in that, if you're not familiar with it. So I'm always wondering, whenever you find out that something has utility, I'm always wondering the question, is it useful? I mean, does it actually have a use? Or is it one of these things like there's a lot of knowledge that you can have, but at the end of the day, it's really not terribly useful to you? Like, for instance, if you stand up in a group of people and you've got 150 people in the audience, you can say, all right, so how many of you need to lose weight? And some people put their hands in the air. And then you ask the question, well, how many of you know how to lose weight? And, you know, almost everyone puts their hand in the air. And then the next question is, well, how's that working out for you? That knowledge is not terribly useful to you because you're actually in a position where you'd like to lose weight and you're not doing it. So what's missing in that? And I think the thing about music is it's just one of these things where there's activity going on while you're engaged in it.
I think there's activity when you're even not engaged with it. So, like, just it's working on a level sometimes that's beyond our cognitive, it's beyond our cognitive level. So that's why we can listen to music. The music can be on in the background and we
Yeah.
can do other things because it's working on a level that's not a conscious level to a great extent. And not to say that yes, you can be engaged with it and maybe it has a different kind of impact. And that's why when you are running, you're playing a certain type of music, and that's because I don't know, it keeps you upbeat, it gives you joy, it makes you want to move, you know. And so that's to the effect of music playing a different role depending on the circumstance that you're in. Like obviously, when I'm working on a client, I'm not playing music like that. I'm playing a lot of instrumentals, a lot of uh, Deuter, or different piano soloists or things like that, where if I'm listening to music that I want to feel uplifted, I'm going to play different types of music. Or so there is the sort of unconscious or subconscious level of us being around music and being able to multitask, but then there's the participatory, or the fact that music can drive you to do something or just makes you feel like you want to, it's like I say, move, because there is music where you just want to feel like you want to get up and dance, like that kind.
It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Apple Fitness, I use them, especially in the winter time. Like I'll use their cycling programs, and they actually have songs with a certain BPM to match your pedal cadence to. So if they want your pedal cadence to be between 65 and 70 revolutions per minute, that's the bass line or the beat line going in the song in the background so you can mesh it up. So they use the music as a tool to actually help you establish a rhythm, for the exercise program they put together. It's pretty cool. They even use the songs to, the song ends when different segments of interval training or whatever end, and then it shifts. So yeah, there's a lot of cool things you can do with it.
I love that, but it makes a lot of sense. But I think
Yeah.
just the ability of music to uplift, or the fact that how often, like, I sit and I play music in the house, and you know, music to clean to or to cook to, like all those types of things, which, to me, if I think of cooking and I think, well, actually cleaning does give me joy. I like to clean. So I find it very cathartic. Like, just, it's a great way for me to, and so, it's just to, there is a specific type of music that I like to do to do those tasks.
Well, funny enough, the house cleaning actually, in many cases, contributes more to your caloric burn than some of the other exercises that people do.
Correct.
Just pick up a mop and clean the bathroom, and get down on your hands and knees and do all that sort of thing. And before you know, you got a half-hour workout in, and you've burned 325 calories.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's actually a term for that. I cannot for the life of me remember what it is. It's like something that the it's like NEAT is the acronym or something, but it's basically the thermodynamic caloric burn of just movement. And
Yeah,
yeah, you're absolutely right. And even the fact that some people burn a tremendous amount of calories just because they're fidgety. So all these little micro movements and shifting around, it just, it increases your energy output. So, and we would
yeah,
see that with kids. I mean, we work with a classroom of kids and you want to get them moving, just put on a song and they're like, that the opposite of the sound bowl. Give them a song that they can move to and they can't stop themselves. It's hysterical.
yeah. Do you listen to silent music in your head at particular times, like maybe when you're starting to get into the meditative state, or just a relaxation, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and have to make a dash to the bathroom and come back, and then the next thing you know, your mind starts getting thoughts that are more than likely not going to let you go back to sleep right away?
I definitely do not.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I
Yeah,
think if
yeah,
anything, I go to my breathing when that kind of stuff
yeah.
happens. So I just turn to my breath when, if I feel like my thoughts are getting too, are going to prevent me from falling asleep or something. I just go back to my breath.
Yep.
Um, I have other circumstances like when I'm in the shower. I always like that's the perfect opportunity where a song pops into my head. Um,
Do you
so
sing it or do you just listen?
I'm a little bit of both, I think. I think there are days I sing and then there are days I just kind of, it's on in my head or whatever, because the water
I
itself
never
creates
think you sing.
vibration. What?
I just know so many people that say they sing in the shower, and I never think of it.
Yeah, they do. I think it is. I think it's I don't know.
I feel like I'm missing out now, Jan, you know? I'm gonna have to have some sort of a reminder to not only have the music in my head, but, you know, actually let it out a little bit and sing in the shower.
Well, I think there's other places, like how many people sing in the car,
Yeah,
sing while they're
guilty
driving.
as charged.
Yeah, sing in
Yeah,
the car while they're driving, road trips. Like it just, I don't know. It's kind of conducive.
it's funny. The, putting the music on a very long trip. I have 2 or 3 people over the years that I've done long driving with, I mean, upwards of 8 to 15 hours, let's say. And I have one that I dearly love, and she knows the words to absolutely every freaking song that's ever been written and played on the radio. She probably owns all the albums too. But God love her, she can't carry a tune in a bucket with a lead cover. And at some point, I had to just sort of give up that there was an actual melody to the original song and just really appreciate how she was expressing herself self and how it was coming out in the look on her face. Do you know what I mean? Clearly she couldn't hear her voice not being in tune with the music coming out of the stereo system. And then I thought to myself, how freeing, how exceptional and extraordinary is that to just experience joy without any need for it to conform to what the rest of the music is? And I would never have thought about that until you started talking about singing in the car.
And it's always really like intriguing and just kind of in a good, like in a really great way of people who are
Yeah.
musicians, thinking to that level, thinking musically.
Yes.
Uh, you know, I have a friend who's a professional drummer, and it's always amazing to me how most of the musicians I know play multiple instruments. It's kind of like they have their dominant instrument and then they have what they call instruments they kind of just dabble in, which is really they play them, but that's just not their primary instrument. And
Yeah.
how it's like just that way of whatever that gift that you have, or the way you respond to vibration, or you have the ability to whatever compose or create music or whatever. It's just amazing to me that
Yes.
that gift.
And most people, it's a gift that they got over a period of 8 to 10 years. It's like, the overnight success on TV. And they started getting interested in music at a very early age, 5, 6, 7 years old, say, and then went through whatever singing programs or whatever, what do they call that in grammar school? Not a beat, but basically they're noisemakers to teach kids how to have a little bit of musical time while they're playing John Philip Sousa marching music or something of that nature, percussion type instruments. But it's remarkable. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the Get Back series for the Beatles, the new 9 hours. It's three-hour segments talking about how they got together and they wrote all of this music, and it did away with a lot of the made up stuff, the lore, the rumors that then became fact. And turns out, that almost all of the Beatles is a perfect example of what you're saying. They all played multiple instruments. So you had, recordings where John's playing bass, Paul's playing drums, even uh, George Harrison was playing drums in one of them. But the neat part of it is that how fluidly they moved through it to the point where people weren't quite sure who actually was playing which instruments after the fact on which of the studio cuts. So there's these questions about whether or not Paul was playing drums when Ringo wasn't in the studio for a couple of recordings that they did, etc. But it's the same thing, um, having gone to the Shabu, back in the 70s and early 80s, and seeing 100 different acts during that period of time with James Montgomery, Tower of Power, Jay Giles, just all sorts of blues musicians who would have people that would move around from piano to drums. And I guess what it comes down to is at some point they get over whether or not they're any good at that instrument. It comes down to just expressing themselves in the moment, and how can I accompany and be in concordance with, the singer, the blues man, the lead guitarist, if you will. Do either of you play instruments?
I've dabbled in guitar a little bit through the years, but no. Can strum a couple
So
chords, that's about it.
I got interested in guitar my senior year in high school. My parents bought me a guitar for Christmas that year. And then everywhere through college and everything, I was playing all sorts of different songs, and mostly I was doing, the open chords, open string chords type of things. And then I learned how to do chord shapes, up and down the guitar neck and that sort of thing. And then I got to my point where, because of high school choir and chorus and that, um, I would be singing harmonies in songs where people didn't have harmonies. But at one point, no joke, I had 35 guitars, and I could play a few of them.
I play piano. Well, I mean, I played as a kid, and I still have a piano. And prior to COVID, I decided that I was gonna start again. So I started taking piano lessons again, just to, you know, refresh. It was actually quite interesting taking it as an adult, even relearning or refreshing because I hadn't played in years again, and how hard it was actually, to coordinate. I don't think as a kid I ever thought of the difference between my right and left hand and playing, because I'm righty, playing with my non-dominant hand and everything and the strength in that non-dominant hand. And then as an adult, noticing how challenging that was, the coordination of both and stuff. So it was
Right.
really an interesting lesson for me in that way. I mean, let alone, I mean, I loved playing, but when I actually started to look at it from a more cognitive or brainy kind of place, I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. you know.
And it's remarkable that you remember it that way, because as a kid you had nothing to be concerned about whether or not your left hand was doing what it was supposed to or your right hand was. Only as an adult could you look back and now be concerned that the left hand's not keeping up its part of the bargain.
Right. And also the fact that there was probably a less, as I was younger, because I started playing probably when I was like 9 or 8,
Right.
that there was probably less dominance to one side. I mean, I probably, and as the years go on, your dominant becomes more dominant unless unless you're really aware and you're trying to work your non-dominant side, that just
Yes.
gets to be more and more powerful and your non-dominant side kind of gets left behind, you know, and that
Yes.
develops over time. So as an adult, all of a sudden, I'm not going to say how old I am, so how many ever years later, um,
And
all of a sudden that becomes a lot more, you know, magnified, so.
I, it's funny that you talk about it in just that way because I had a friend who was self-taught on the piano, never took a lesson, and this guy could play anything. I mean, all by ear, and how he trained himself to have a strong left hand so that he really wouldn't, be thinking about what the notes were. It was just automatic, like typing. Um, he would put a record on and he would play with his hand, right hand sitting on his side. He would play nothing but the left hand notes,
Hmm.
and he said it was remarkable, awkward as all get out for about 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden, something clicked. And he said, then I was playing the right hand notes with my left hand, and then I was doing hopping back and forth between them. And then I was doing chords that as far as I could reach, picking up part of the right hand and the left hand. And this guy is a remarkable musician today, unbelievable. And I won't tell you who it is, but people pay major bucks to go see him.
I mean, it sounds like it would be an amazing person to listen to.
The other thing too, you stop and think about how some people seem to be naturally wired for music. You know the
Hmm.
story of Elton
Mhm.
John, right? And it was like the Mozart story, only in modern day tense, where when he sat down with people that were supposed to be training them, and they would ask him, what he could play, and then he would say, "Can you hum something that you're pretty sure I've never heard before?" And then he would, in you know, in the moment, improvise and play it almost note for note, like the original, piece was constructed by the whoever it was, and that was remarkable.
Hmm. Yeah, it is really interesting how people are just wired for music. And I guess,
When
to me, it makes me think about how people see the world. Like how does an artist see the world?
Right.
In color, through colors and, and lines or whatever, or angles and shapes. And, you know, how does a music how does a musician or someone who's musical perceive the world, you know, through vibration and tone and things like that.
Well, the thing that I thought was most remarkable about Elton and Bernie Taupin was, the fact that Bernie wrote these marvelous, incomplete lyrics that in most cases was the same as John Lennon. He strung words together that he really enjoyed the sound of when he said it in a sentence, that they might not have, made any sense at all when they were spoken aloud. However, when Elton grabbed a hold of it, you got things like, Madman Across the Water, and many other things. Those first three albums that the two of them did together, as far as I'm concerned, they were freaking magic. And there probably hasn't been better writing in the last 300 years. Really good writing, equally as good, I would say. But I would place what they did together, at a very high level of being able to make something up from nothing and then be able to communicate with every single listener. That to me is the universality of the communication. To me, talks about whether it's successful or effective.
Mhm. Ken, in your work with kids, do you use music a lot or no?
Um, it depends. I mean, not too much. If we have, if it's, sometimes we'll have some kids that just they're in that kind of intelligence lane where music helps them kind of, I don't know, focus in better or receive. So we'll put some music on if it's necessary. But for the most time, no. Other than our if we're doing something specifically choreographed to music for a movement-based program like dance or martial arts, obviously we use it there. But no, it's not actually that big a part of what we do other than maybe a pattern interrupt or a break or, kind of way of refocusing or re-energizing, something like that, or calming down even. Yeah.
The other really cool thing is, do you remember Children of a Lesser God?
Hmm.
And that the music, the boomerang rang and all that. They couldn't hear the singing, but they could pick up the vibrations on their chest, and they knew when they were supposed to chime in with the boomerang rang and all that sort of thing. Um, don't have a lot of experience where people have used that. You know, I haven't really heard too much about the what they're doing at the school for the deaf and that sort of thing. But when when you think about almost every single memorable, you come back to the Lilies of the Field with Sidney Poitier in the 1950s, and him singing, to the nuns, the Amen song, right? And it just goes on and on and on and on. And whether it's Elvis or other musicals like Bye Bye Birdie or, the producers or whatever, it's just like bringing music and that added dimension of communication just moves everything to a higher plane.
Yeah, and I was thinking about I am trained and have taught a class called Ageless Grace, which is a mind body movement class um, based on neuroplasticity in the brain. And so it's all about moving from a seated position. So it's meant to be done seated because we're used to navigating and making certain moves standing, and it causes different brain reactions and synapses to connect to be able to do fly kicks from a seated position, versus standing and things like that. But it's all done to music,
Yeah.
and it's I've gone into a lot of assisted living places and have taught it and stuff. And that's the other thing about music is it sort of has the ability to touch people of all ages, and the ability of music to revitalize an older person or someone who has memory issues or cognitive issues as they age, and the ability of music to bring them back
Yes.
Hmm.
to a place of focus and where they can communicate, or where they don't move normally but all of a sudden they move because that beat and that music reminds them of a time that takes them right back to when they were young you know
I agree with you. There's been studies of octogenarians and 90-year-olds who uh, just became younger as a result of doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's remarkable, and I think it's probably something we obviously should bring in more to all groups. I mean, I think it's a great way to get people moving who don't necessarily want to move, you know,
Hmm.
who are
Yeah.
sedentary.
Yeah. The timeouts that I used to get when I was 6 or 7 years old was to sit down in front of my dad's snazzy new stereo in these beautiful brown cabinets and listen to Rhapsody in Blue until I seemed like I was more calm. Well, any other closing thoughts, folks?
Go listen to some music today.
100%. 100%. The language of the gods. Jan, thanks so much for putting this out here for us to have a go at, and I really appreciate where we came from in the beginning. That this is how we bring people together. This is how we share an emotional situation in a catharsis type of a thing, or build esprit de corps, or build some sort of a cultural sameness, or whatever it is that we're doing together. But just have fun.
Hmm. Well, that's the other thing about music. It has the ability to bring people to a place of fun
Yeah.
Mhm.
and joy.
Yeah, and for many people, it's a similar place that they go to when they read a book, only you don't spend as much time getting there.
Right. And I think I like the ability of music to bring people together. A lot of, reading a book is something you do usually, unless you're in a book club or something, and isolate, it's a solitary kind of
Yeah.
endeavor. And, music is something you can do easily do with other people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I guess that kind of completes our podcast for this week. And again, a lot of fun. Definitely got goosebumps 2 or 3 times in the last hour. So thank you both for your energy and what you've brought. And you at home, I really encourage you to take on board some of the things that we talked about. We have two experts on being healthy. Not me. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress. But between Jan and Ken, they've probably got, let me put it to you this way, it would be a nice lifetime of experience in helping people find the best them. So in the meantime, remember, this week, light the candle, pass it on, and let's have a world that works together. All right? Namaste.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.